our MahaAP, Dr. Jain sir and Secretary Sadachar, and especially for Bakul Parekh and Basuraj for this dais for this beautiful discussion. And this bit confusion was there. The speakers are the pediatrician, senior pediatrician. They're using this sonography in their day-to-day practice, and sonography is not is called like a stethoscope in your practice. It's a long back in 1784. Sonography was used later on in 1915 when there's a Titanic was sink, and then hydrophone was used to detect the ship which was sink in the deep sea. And that Paul Langevin had used that, and that was the first transducer they used in 1945. Carl, that is a neurosurgeon, he tried to use that waves to detect the brain tumor. So we have the long good history of the sonography, right? And I think that the clinical practice is very much important. You can use it in different clinical conditions, like almost like a musculoskeleton to respiratory and even brain and cardiac and abdomen, of course. So I here welcome Dr. Vikram as the first speaker, and he's my friend, good friend of mine since 20 years from Sholapur. I am myself also from Sholapur, and he has doing using his sonography learnings in last 10 to 12 years. He has his own sonography machine due to PSP tag. We know petition cannot report it, but definitely in our clinical practice, we can use this radiology machine to help somewhat to the patient as well as for ourselves. So I hand over mic to Vikram to start his deliberation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, all. Thank you, Dr. Jayant and Dr. Sadachar for this opportunity. Dr. Mohanty and Dr. Jay Bhandarkar, Dr. Hemant for selecting me and Dr. Mahesh for this program, and Dr. Bakul Parekh sir and Dr. Basuraj to give DIIP as a platform for our presentation. To begin with, this would be the plan. Discuss some basics of ultrasound and its application in clinical pediatrics. I am audible properly?
Yeah,
I just want to confirm.
Okay. Yeah. Right now, yes.
So the questions and doubts that raise in our mind when a pediatrician starts to think whether he should do an ultrasound, he thinks who should be doing an ultrasound, why I as a pediatrician should be doing an ultrasound, what I as a pediatrician should look for when I'm doing an ultrasound, and how should I go about while performing an ultrasound. So who could do the ultrasound? Certainly the radiologist will be doing the ultrasound. He does an organ-oriented ultrasound. The cardiologist restricts himself to the heart. The obstetricians and gynecologists have their own world of obstetric ultrasound and fetal ultrasound. But that is the tradition. But what is the history? In 1877, the piezoelectric effect was discovered by the Curie siblings. In 1915, after the loss of Titanic, much money was poured into maritime security, and the outcome was the role of ultrasound in detecting icebergs under the sea. It was in 1942 that Dr. Carl Dusik diagnosed a brain tumor using an ultrasound, and he was labeled as the pioneer of diagnostic ultrasound. He was a physician, mind you, and thereafter was the era which was dominated by radiologists, the cardiologists, and the obstetrician and gynecologists. But it was in 1989 that Dr. Daniel Augustin, a physician, an intensivist from France, first used ultrasound in the ICU. Then came the era of point of care ultrasound, where ultrasound was used as a stethoscope, and it was realized that it had a deep impact in the management in ICU because it detected certain abnormalities which were not seen, it ruled out certain abnormalities, it increased the speed of diagnosis and increased the speed of performing certain invasive procedures. And that is the reason why we should be doing as pediatricians as ultrasound when we see our patients in critical care. What is another reason? Reason number 2 is the PCPNDT Act and its amendments. The small and dedicated pediatric hospitals were handicapped because the radiologists could not go to all hospitals. The availability of radiologists and cardiologists 24/7 was a question. Decision making became difficult in NICU and PSU, and therefore the necessity became the mother of invention. As pediatricians, what are we supposed to look for when we are doing ultrasound? Remember that pediatrician is not a radiologist. He is not a cardiologist, and he will be doing problem-oriented study and bail him out of the critical situation. Perform ultrasound from a clinician's perspective, do focused or targeted ultrasound, not a comprehensive ultrasound at all. With this background, I will just go through some basic principles quickly. Piezoelectric property is the basic of ultrasound material. For example, the quartz crystal. What does that mean? It means that the material is able to convert electrical energy into mechanical energy, and the same material is able to convert mechanical energy into electrical energy. This material is packed in the transducer. The transducer is both a transmitter and receiver of the signals, ultrasound signals. So voltage is applied to the transducer crystals, which are packed at the tip of the probe, and then with this voltage there is a change in the current, and this leads contraction. This leads to the deformation of the quartz crystals and leads to the production of ultrasound waves, just like a tuning fork is used in production of the sound. Now, once this ultrasound waves, which is just a 1 millimeter of less in thickness, it is projected into the body. Part of the ultrasound waves will pass through and through. Part of them will be absorbed by the organs, and part of the ultrasound waves will be reflected back to the transducer. The transducer carries these ultrasound waves to the machine. The software converts that into an image. The image could be an M-mode image, which is displayed as wavy lines, and this image is used to study the heart valves and the vessels. Or a B mode, in this the image is displayed as light and bright dots, which collectively forms a two-dimensional image. Now it is the B mode image that we are likely to see more and more, and therefore little more about it. The structures can be anechoic, that is, which are fluid, which are black in color. This is the image sagittal section of a brain, and you can see the black cerebrospinal fluid here. The structures can be hyperechogenic or white in color. For example, fat, bone, air, and tough structures like the diaphragm and the pleura, as in this picture, the skull bone. Or it can be different shades of the gray. For example, different organs according to their density, the ultrasound waves will be absorbed or reflected back, and therefore they are called echogenic. For example, the cerebellum here. Now, with this background, these are the certain conditions that we are seeing day-to-day practice, and we'll just see how we can apply the ultrasound knowledge to our day-to-day practice, day-to-day conditions. Now, let us begin with fluid status. It is the simplest of all. Now, there is a question: how much fluids to give? This will be different in septic shock. This will be different in dengue shock. This will be different in acute kidney injury. This will be different in cardiogenic shock. And now, with the realization that apart from the endothelial cell layer, there is one more superficial layer called the glycocalyx, which is very much prone to the speed of giving fluids, the type of giving fluids. There is more concern about the fluid status in critical care. Now, how do we do that? We do that by assessing the inferior vena cava. And how do we do that? There is a variation in the diameter of the inferior vena cava with respiration. With inspiration, it collapses. With expiration, it distends. And this collapsing and distension is called the collapsibility index, which we can measure. Either this or by direct measurement of the IVC diameter, but these norms are not available in children. Now, how do we apply this to the volume status of the child? Whenever there is volume depletion, the IVC will be smaller in size and it will collapse more. If you replace the volume, the diameter will increase and the collapsibility will reduce. And if there is a volume overload, the IVC becomes distended and the collapsibility is absent totally. Now remember, all this is in the spontaneously breathing child. There is the same effect is there, but it is just the opposite. In positive pressure ventilation, the IVC distends instead of collapsing in inspiration. Now, how do we apply this knowledge to the bedside? So if there is during respiration, if the variation is increased, it means that the CVP is low. If the variation is decreased, it means that the CVP is adequate or high. If the variation is increased, CVP is low, that means we can give a fluid challenge. On the contrary, if the variation is reduced, then fluid channel should not be given to that particular child. Now, just to see practically how this is possible, we put the ultrasound probe, as I have shown in the picture, in the sagittal plane in the midline, and direct the probe over the IVC instead of the aorta. And then this is how you are going to put the M-mode cursor, and this is how you are going to see the aorta. With inspiration, it will collapse. With expiration, it will distend. I will show you a video of this. Now look at this. On the corner, there is a picture. First, the probe is placed in transverse position, and we identify the aorta, which has got an echogenic wall. and the IVC which does not have an ecogenic wall. Then we turn the probe in the sagittal plane and we look for the IVC. So this is the IVC. See, it is entering the right atrium. Put your sir 1 centimeter away from the plane. With inspiration, the IVC collapses. With expiration, it extends. Inspiration, it collapses. With expiration, this is normal inferior assessment. The patient is euvolemic. Now, what happens if the CVP is low and patient is hypovolemic? You can see that there is a total collapse of the IVC with inspiration. And with expiration, there is little bit distension. This is a situation with low CVP and fluid should be given to this child. For example, this is a child who is in shock, and you can see that the IVC is not seen at all. Both the walls of the IVC are coming together, and just 18 minutes later, after giving fluid, you can see that the IVP has opened up. If you can see the timing, it is just a matter of 18 minutes, and immediately we come to know that this patient is going to respond to fluids. Whereas in this case, you can see that there is no variation in the respiration, there is no collapsibility at all, and therefore this is a volume overload state, and fluid should not be given to this patient. Maybe there is some different cause of shock in this case. With all this background, there are certain limitations. However, there will be mediolateral and craniocaudal movement of the IVC, which will not give you the same every time that you are going to see. There will be subject to subject variability and time to time variability. There will be difficulty of visualizing IVC in an obese child. Surgical patient with raised intra-abdominal pressure, the IVC will be collapsed or it might be distended depending on the pressure. There will be anatomic and individual variation as well, and there is lack of reference values in children. Nevertheless, the advantages predominate, and therefore, since it is a non-invasive method, we can assess the IVC rapidly, and it can be easily repeated again and again wherever we want. Along with the concept of fluid responsiveness is a concept of fluid tolerability. How much fluids are we going to give? Where is our patient on the Starling curve? We do not know. And therefore, after every bolus, we have to check whether this fluid is doing good or harm to our patient. And this is done by assessing the B line. So these are the B lines. This is a vertical line going all over the image from the superior part to the inferior part. This is a laser line. I will come to that once again when I will show you the lung ultrasound. So this is a single B line in this picture. This is normal. Two B lines in a non-dependent lung are normal. But when there are multiple B lines in the non-dependent part of the lung, called lung rockets, it indicates that there is increase in the extravascular lung water. Now, this extravascular lung water can be in the interstitium of the lung or it can be in the alveoli. If it is in the interstitium of the lung, it is called interstitial edema. If it is in the alveolus, it is called pulmonary edema. So, practically, even before the child develops pulmonary edema, when we detect the fluid in the interstitium, we can detect the occurrence of pulmonary edema. Now, next is the fluid leak. We encounter this situation in dengue patients and in patients of sepsis. So, how much is the fluid leak and what we should do to prevent that leak, or how we should adjust our IV fluids? So, fluid assessment by ultrasound can be seen by the leakage of fluid in the peritoneal space, in the pleural space, and in the lungs. In the peritoneal space, most commonly fluid is seen around the gallbladder because there is loose areolar tissue around the gallbladder, and wherever there is a loose areolar tissue, the fluid will accumulate first. So this is where the gallbladder comes into picture. So this is a pericholecystic edema. Next is the spaces around the liver called the perihepatic spaces. On the medial side, on the lateral side, that is the left side and the right side. So in the superior and inferior part of the liver, you can see that there is accumulation of fluid, which is dark in color. I told you that fluids are dark in color. So this is the accumulation of fluid in the superior perihepatic space and the inferior perihepatic space, which is also called the hepatorenal pouch or the Morrison's pouch. In a supine position, fluid accumulates in the Morrison's pouch and the paracolic gutter first. Also, fluid can be detected in the pelvis posterior to the bladder, as in this patient, and also around the spleen, that is a perisplenic collection. Now let us see in this patient. This is a girl. I have placed the probe in the sagittal, in the coronal plane in the epigastric region, and I want to detect fluid leakage of fluid in the pleural space. Now the posterior diaphragmatic recess on the right side is deeper than that in the left, and therefore fluid will accumulate there first. So I am going to concentrate on the posterior diaphragmatic recess, and this recess will be seen below the probe First, I will be seeing the liver, and posterior to the liver, I will be seeing the posterior diaphragmatic space. So here, below the liver, so superficial part is reflected in the top part of the image, and the deeper part is at the bottom. So here you can see that this is the liver, and posterior to the liver, this the echo-freeze space or the black structure that you are seeing is the fluid, and lung is floating in that fluid. So this is a collection of fluid in the right perihepatic space. Here now fluid has accumulated in the interstitium. 1 or 2 B lines I told you is normal. These are the vertical laser-like lines, and now in this case you can see that there are multiple lines. There are 3 or more B lines, and this is a interstitial edema, or also called the interstitial syndrome. So this was about the fluid status and the fluid leak. Now let us come to the cardiac function. Now when do we want to know the cardiac function of a case? When we are dealing with fluid resistant shock, when we are diagnosed the clinically a case of cardiomyopathy, or we are dealing with case of myocarditis. And this is done by eyeballing. But what is exactly eyeballing? Because the eyes will not see what the mind will not know. And therefore, we have to see what exactly look for when we are eyeballing the heart. For this, we want to know, we should know that the cardiac, the heart contracts in 3 planes: longitudinal planes, the circumferential plane, and the radial plane. Because the myocardial fibers are arranged in this manner: the longitudinal fibers, the circumferential fibers, and the radial fibers. Now, the longitudinal fibers are arranged in such a way that by the apical 4-chamber view, we are able to see the contraction of the longitudinal fibers. Now, in this picture, you can please concentrate on the mitral annulus, which is the annulus of the heart, which is formed by the tricuspid wall and the mitral wall. So you can see both the tricuspid and mitral wall are moving with the contraction towards the apex of the heart. This is called the annular excursion. Am I clear about this?
Absolutely clear.
Yes, thank you so much. So you can see that there is a beautiful annular extension towards the apex.
You can show the tricuspid and mitral bulb separately by your cursors.
Okay. Yes, sure, sir. So this is the right side of the heart. This is the left side of the heart. So this is the bigger chamber is the ventricle. This is the right ventricle. This is the left ventricle. This is the left atrium, and this is the right atrium. And this is the tricuspid wall, and this is the mitral wall. So these walls together, it forms the annulus. And with each cardiac contraction, each systole, this annulus is moving towards the apex. Better the movement, better the cardiac contractility. As opposed to this, now you can see in this patient that there is hardly any annular movement. Can you appreciate this? So this is very cardiac contractility. This is a case of dilated cardiomyopathy. The second is the radial plane. Now radial fibers are arranged in such a way that you can see them in the parasternal long axis view. So in the schematic diagram, I have shown that superficial part is the right ventricle, deeper to that is the left ventricle. In between is the interventricular septum and the posterior wall of the left ventricle. Now what you have to see is that when there is a systole, the cavity of the left ventricle becomes small. The interventricular septum and the posterior wall come close together. Also, there is increase in thickness of the interventricular septum and the increase in thickness of the posterior wall of the left ventricle. So this all together forms the systolic function of the left ventricle. Also, you can see the movement of the anterior leaflet of the mitral wall. As in the diastole, the wall opens and it goes very near to the interventricular septum. And this movement of the wall will give you a rough guide of a diastolic function of the left ventricle. Though a very rough guide, nowadays there are superior methods which the cardiologists are using. But for us, we can have a very good judgment. So this gives you a function of the radial fibers. Now coming to the circumferential fibers. Here you can see that the shape of the left ventricle is circular in the schematic diagram. The shape of the right ventricle is a crescent shape. And look at the shape of the interventricular septum. This is the convex towards the right side. So here is a normal patient who is having a circular left ventricle, crescentic shape right ventricle, and the convexity of the interventricular septum is maintained to the right. So this is a normal heart. But look here, what is happening here? Though the ventricular is contracting well, it is contracting very fast. It is a hyperkinetic contraction. And see the interventricular septum that it has become very flat, or in some contraction it has become a D shape, or in fact it is even going inside the left ventricle. So this is an abnormal movement of the interventricular septum. Now, when this occurs in a diastole, it becomes a diastolic overload of the heart. For example, a large ASD or an anomalous venous drainage. And when this happens in a systole, it is suggestive of a systolic overload of the heart. For example, with pulmonary hypertension. Now, with this background, we'll see some cases. So, this is a 4-month-old girl who was previously healthy but had feeding difficulty of only 1 day duration, and the next day she is brought with a state of shock. You can see the very off color. You can see that the capillary filling time is very low. You can see that there is mottling and there is respiratory distress, and the patient is totally lethargic. Now, when I start evaluating this patient for shock, I will first want to know the fluid status of this child. And what I find that the IVC is totally distended. So I should not, so the usual teaching that in a patient of fluids, I will not give fluids, very large amount of fluids to the child, maybe just 5 ml per kg as a bolus dose. So you can see that the IVC here is dilated, so I have to be careful. Now, what is the reason for that? Next, I see that there is some fluid in the right pleural cavity. So there is some evidence of fluid leakage as well. And then when I see the heart, I see that in the longitudinal plane, there is hardly any annular excursion. The radial plane, what I'm seeing that the left ventricle is totally dilated. See the anterior mitral leaflet, it is hardly moving and going towards the interventricular septum, and the contraction of the both the ventricles in this patient is very much limited. This was a case of dilated cardiomyopathy, which required initially were treated with inotropes. Case number, the second case, this is a 2-month-old child. This is a preterm. This child is an NSU graduate, and he comes with history of fever, cough, breathlessness. RS, there is bilateral wheeze, a provisional diagnosis of bronchiolitis, and there is tachycardia. So now what? Since there is tachycardia, I did a echo. So you can just write down your answers in the chat. So what you are able to see here, how about the contractility? The contractility seems good in this plane, but what in addition you are seeing that around the heart there is a black space, and this black space is nothing but this child has developed pericardial effusion. Known in cases of bronchiolitis, though we did not have to do much about this. Now this is another case, a 7-month-old girl who was diagnosed as bronchiolitis, but with the usual treatment of bronchiolitis with nebulization, IV fluids and all, she did not settle down for 2 days. And when we did the echo, what we are seeing here is that the heart is become very small. The heart is floating inside the pericardial fluid. This was a case of cardiac tamponade, and we had to immediately do some intervention and drain that out. The child became absolutely all right within a matter of few hours. Had this not been detected on time, then this child would have landed in cardiogenic shock. This is another 2.5-month-old child who is diagnosed case of lower respiratory tract infection, has got tachycardia as well as gallop. Now this I am going to show you, but I will request that those who have seen this should not answer. So I am giving just 2-3 seconds to make answer. This, as you can see, this is the hyperkinetic activity of the heart, and there is increased echogenicity of the myocardium and the interventricular septum. This is a case of Pompey's disease. Dr. Mahesh also had a similar case. Now we go ahead with the lungs. In lungs, our usual problems are pneumonia, empyema, and abnormal opacity, and pneumothorax. Now let us see them one by one. Now, just as in the heart, I could show you the myocardium, I could show you the chambers, I could show you the walls. I cannot show you the lung parenchyma. I can neither show you the airways. This is because there is a lot of air in the lungs, and therefore it is an obstruction to the ultrasound waves. But what I can show you are the different artifacts, and these artifacts were systematically studied by Dr. Daniel Lichtenstein for the first time in the intensive care unit. And he had proposed these definitions as the pleural line, the A line, B line, and the lung sliding. So in any case, we have to see these 4 things. So pleural line is a line between the 2 ribs. These anechoic structures are 2 ribs. And this is the echogenic line, is the pleural line. It is a hyperechogenic line, 0.5 centimeters deeper to the probe. It is an interface between the chest wall and the aerated lung. This is called the pleural line. The A lines are horizontal lines. They are parallel to each other. They are reverberation of the pleural lines. They are motionless and they are signs of a normal lung. And the B line is a vertical line. This line is again hyperechogenic, it is well defined, it is long, it does not fade, it erases the A lines, but it moves with the lung sliding. And finally, the lung sliding is nothing but sliding of the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura. The parietal pleura is attached to the chest wall and the visceral pleura is attached to the lung parenchyma. And because there is a thin layer of fluid between them, with each inspiration and expiration, there is the movement of the pleura over each other. So I have placed the probe in the intercostal space and you can see the flickering movement. You can see the movement of the pleura. Though you cannot see the visceral and parietal pleura separately, you can see the movement. Also in this case, you can see A lines, which are parallel lines, and you can see 1 or 2 B lines. So this is a pleural line, which is sliding. There are A lines, there are B lines, and this is the lung, which is a normal lung of this boy. Now, when you put an M mode cursor over this type of lung, you can get this characteristic picture. In this picture, you can see that there is a superficial part which consists of white echogenic lines which are horizontal and a deeper part which is granular. This superficial part is the chest wall and this the granular part is the lung proper. And since this appears like a seashore, it is called a seashore sign. So seashore sign is a sign of a normal lung. Now with this background of artifacts, the pleural line, the A line, B line, lung sliding, and seashore sign. Let us see some conditions. So this was an operated case of superficial atresia with tube fistula. Post-operative is brought with the intercostal drain. And now look at this X-ray, which looks actually okay. There is nothing wrong in this X-ray. But see this kid. Are you happy with this respiration? I, as the pediatrician, I am not happy with this respiration, but the surgeons say that this is okay and there should not be any problem. But I persuaded them that this is not a normal respiration. The child might require ventilation anytime. So I had to prove them that what is wrong with this child. So the left side, which is the normal side, I will perform sonography first on this side and see the usual lung signs. See the A lines, see the B lines, which are vertical lines, see the pleural line. They are all normal. And you can see the pleural sliding as well. Now, all these things, the A lines, B lines, and the pleural sliding, see on the right side. You can see the A lines, parallel lines, but you are not able to see the B lines and you are not able to see lung sliding at all. So the absence of pleural sliding and absence of B lines are classic signs of pneumothorax. A single B line rules out pneumothorax. So with this, I persuaded them that you have to do something. And what they did was they changed the ICD from number 16 to number 20. Now let us see the effect. Normal. And the same area you can see now, this also has, there are B lines, there is lung sliding, and this pneumothorax is totally drained off just because of the change in the size of the ICD. And now what happens to the patient? Now the respiration is more comfortable and they are happy that the problem has been taken care of. Another sign of pneumothorax is on the M mode, you can see that there is no differentiation between superficial chest wall and the deeper lung. The whole field is replaced by horizontal lines, white lines. They are staggered like layers of atmosphere over one another, and therefore it is called the stratosphere sign. Absence of lung pulse is another sign of pneumothorax. Normally, the pulsations of the heart are transmitted to the lung pleura, as you can see here. The pleura also pulsating. So absence of lung pulse is a sign of pneumothorax. And this is a very specific sign of pneumothorax. It increases the specificity of your diagnosis when this sign is present. Now what happens when there is collection of air in the pleural space, the air will go in the anti-gravity direction. So in a supine position, the air will be concentrated over the top. And the air pocket might be such that when you place the probe, part of this air pocket will be below the probe. And part of the probe will be overlying the lung pocket. Part of the probe is not overlying the lung pocket. At this point of differentiation between the pocket of pneumothorax and the normal lung is the lung point. And this is very specific of pneumothorax. Now let us see. So I put a probe like this on a patient, and what I am going to see is a pocket of pneumothorax. What I am expecting is at the medial end of this probe, I am going to see a pneumothorax, signs of pneumothorax, and at the lateral end of this probe, I am going to see signs of a normal lung. So now I have put the probe, I am moving the camera, and you can see that in the medial part there is no movement of the pleura. The pleural slide is absent, and this is a stratosphere side. Now I move my probe, my M mode cursor, and put it on the normal lung where I am seeing B lines and lung slide, and here I can see the seashore side. So here I have demonstrated the lung point, and I have demonstrated that there is a pneumothorax. Now what about the treatment? Now if you find that this lung point is quite medial, you can assume that it is a small pocket of pneumothorax. And therefore, whenever the pneumothorax pocket is quite large, you may not be able to see this lung point because the lung point is quite laterally, or maybe it has gone posteriorly also. So with the shift of this lung point will also give you an impression of the size of the pneumothorax. So pneumothorax is diagnosed by absence of lung sliding, by absence of B lines, absence of lung pulse, and presence of lung point. Now this is another case which was brought to us after day 1, a newborn. The full-term child appropriate for gestational age is got with respiratory distress. This child was treated elsewhere because this child has got respiratory distress for transient tachypnea of newborn, which did not subside at the end of day 1, and therefore it was referred to us. X-ray seems okay. The diagnosis seems commensurate with the transient tachypnea of newborn, except that day 1 has passed in this full-term child, but there is still no improvement. When I did lung ultrasound, I can see that there are signs on both sides. And what I can see is that there is increased number of B lines. The B lines are so much together that they are giving a homogeneous appearance, and there is a hypoechoic space here. And in between that hypoechoic space, what I am seeing are the echogenicities. The same thing I am seeing on this side. This is a superficial pneumonia, and the white spots are the air in the airways that is standing out against the background of the normal lung. So this was congenital pneumonia. It responded to antibiotics. This is a classical sign of phonological air bronchogram. The airways which contain the air, linear shaped, and they are standing out against the background of a hypoechoic lung, which is airless and is occupied by fluid. And this is similar to the radiological air bronchogram that we are all able to see.
The cardiac border is also not seen. The left cardiac border is also not seen.
Yeah, right, correct. And this is a child with a pneumonia. Here you can see that there is a hypoechoic lung, and inside the airways are filling in and emptying. This is a dynamic air bronchogram, which is a classical sign of pneumonia. Remember, 90 to 95% of the pneumonias are superficial pneumonias, and they can be easily detected by ultrasound. But when you come lower down, it is important to differentiate the pneumonia from the spleen on the left side and liver on the right side, because they both look similar together, and therefore you have to look for the intervening diaphragm. Otherwise, you will misdiagnose these cases. So solid tissue appearance with presence of the abnormality on the opposite side of the diaphragm. When there is a subpulmonic effusion, you are able to see anechoic space adjacent to the patch of the pneumonia. And when this anechoic space contains echogenicities, for example, like this with septa, then this is called an empyema. And over a period, when you have a case of pneumonia, you can do ultrasound upfront and monitor the lung fluid, the pleural fluid, because sometimes it will resolve on its own. Now we go one step further in pneumonias. We have diagnosed pneumonias. We can diagnose the segments of pneumonias by seeing in which part of the chest there are signs of pneumonia. Now this is a child neonate with respiratory distress, and this is the X-ray. And in X-ray, what you are able to see? You are able to see that there is an opacity on the right side in the apical area and the mid area. Am I right? Are you agree with this?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is probably a pneumonia. But now, what segment of this lung is affected? That is important. So it appears that the almost whole of the right upper lobe is probably involved. Now we will do the ultrasound for the anterior part of the right chest, the apical part and the posterior part. So this is the anterior part where we expect the anterior segment, and you can see that there is good pleural sliding. You can also see that there are B lines and the lung appears normal. There are A lines also. So there is nothing here. Now see the apex. Let us see the apex in the apical area. The apical segment is also having lung sliding. It's also having the B lines and the A lines. So this is also normal. So what I was expecting, I am not seeing. Now I go to the posterior part. And here what I am seeing are the classical signs of pneumonia, solid tissue appearance, and the sonological air bronchogram. So with ultrasound, now I have demarcated that the posterior segment of the upper lobe is involved. So I direct my chest physiotherapy only to the posterior lobe of the vigorous physiotherapy, the posterior segment of the right upper lobe. And as the traditional teaching that pneumonia takes at least 7 to 8 days to resolve, correct? So now what you see, this was done on 24th September. The first sonography was done on September 24, and now on 18th September, I repeat. And I can see that totally this pneumonia has resolved within 4 days by properly directing my chest physiotherapy to the affected segment of the right upper lobe. A 6-year-old boy comes with history of fever and tachypnea, has a history of trauma to the right side of the chest 3 days back. Trauma to the right side of the chest. An X-ray is taken, and what we find here is that the opacity is on the left side. So this X-ray is reported as pneumonia. Ultrasound is done by ultrasoundologist who report that there is bilateral pneumonia. Now this is the lung ultrasound. Now on this ultrasound, whatever features of pneumonia that I have told you, none of them is seen. What we are seeing here is that there is disruption of the pleural line. There is a hypoechoic space on the right side as well as on the left. In that, there is a echogenicities are there, and there are number of B lines which indicate that there is an extravascular lung water because of some problem. Now these are the classical signs of lung contusion. Whatever you are seeing here is actually the blood. So this child had a lung contusion because of coup and contricoup injury. The injuries are on the right, but the signs are there also on the left. So increase in the B-line artifacts and the peripheral parenchymal lesion are classical signs of lung contusion. Now this child within hours of subsidence of fever is hale and hearty and off O2 in the ICU. Can you imagine a bilateral pneumonia without oxygen and without any respiratory distress in the ICU? We do not, because this is not pneumonia, this is lung contusion. Now, this is a case which comes with fever of 8-month-old with fever of 5 days duration, cough and breathlessness comes for the first time. This is the respiratory distress. This is the X-ray, which probably shows some opacity, definitely shows some opacity on the right side, and in between probably there is some air bronchogram. Air bronchogram is also probably seen on the left side. Now we perform the sonography. Now I am seeing the posterior part of the lung. I have placed the probe here, and you see the cephalic end of the probe should overlie the lung. The caudal part of the probe should overlie the liver, and in between somewhere I should be able to see the diaphragm. So here I am able to see the lung, here I am able to see the liver, because the cephalic part is represented on the right side of the screen. The caudal part of the probe of the image will be represented on the left side of the screen. So this is the lung and the liver, and in between I am going to see the diaphragm. Now I will start the video so that you can appreciate it better. So you can see that the diaphragm is moving, the liver is moving, but see the lung, there are no signs of normal lung. So what is this? So that is a perplexing question. So whenever you want to see some superficial structures, you have to use a high frequency probe. The probe I am using is a low frequency probe because I want to see the whole picture in total. And therefore, I have used that probe. And I am able to also see the heart beating posterior to that lung, to the deeper structure. So now I shift to the high frequency probe and I find that I am seeing no signs of normal lung. In fact, I am seeing some lobulations here with the septae in between. So this is a mass, is a lobulated mass in the chest which MRI was done, the child was operated, and it turned out to be a neuroblastoma. This is a case of 3-month-old child, fever since 4 days, tachypnea, and it is actually an operated case of congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and there is tachypnea, and therefore the relatives are worried now whether it is related to the surgery. And now what I see here is that there is complete opacity of the left upper lobe, and this is what I'm able to see, something like a mass, and this is a homogeneous mass. Echogenicity is like a liver or the spleen. It is scattered foci. It has got a sparry appearance. This is classical of the thymus. So it was nothing but thymus. Another 3-year-old child with fever and cough since 15 days, mild tachypnea. Antibiotics have been given elsewhere, and still there is reduced breath sounds on the left. When I put the probe there, what I see is a well circumscribed lesion, hypoechoic. Inside that, there are some echogenicities. This is very classical of lung abscess, which is actually seen on CT scan as well. This is a newborn who has come with a diaphragmatic diagnosis of hernia, probably eventration. And when I put my probe here, what I am seeing, this is the kidney. I am going to move my probe from below upwards. So you are going to see the kidney first, then this is the spleen. And now you see that this lung is replaced by another mass which has got multiple cysts in that. So this is a cystic mass. This is a congenital cyst dermatoid malformation. Then coming to sepsis, which is our usual diagnosis, this is a case of intussusception, which was operated, resection anastomosis was done, and the surgeon wants to shift the child outside the ICU. And as a pediatrician, we will agree that the look is not normal. When we perform the ultrasound, we find that there is collection of fluid around the liver, and this has got some echogenicities, and therefore this child cannot be shifted out. This child was reoperated. There was leak in the anastomosis. Intra-abdominal sepsis fluid can be diagnosed by the collection of material in the hepatorenal pouch. This is an operated case of meningomyocele who comes with a fever at POD 15 with fever and convulsions, and you find that the ventricles are dilated and there are echogenicities. That is the infected case with ventriculitis. An 8-month-old boy with a diagnosed perimembranous VSD comes with fever and cardiac failure. And here you can see this is a normal feature. I will not give detail, but because you can very well see here that some mass is popping out in the ventricles. So this was a vegetation. This was infective endocarditis. This was a case of trauma to the medial part of the lower tibia, and she had come on day 3. This is a normal side, and on the abnormal side, you can see that there is increase in the soft tissue, and there is elevation of the periosteum here. And under the periosteum, there is some debris collection. On day 3, I could diagnose osteomyelitis of lower end of tibia, and the literature also says so. Deep soft tissue telling periosteal thickening and presence of collection in the subperiosteal space. A depressed newborn is a common scenario. This is a normal cranial ultrasound. You can see here the ventricles, and you can see the choroid plexus, which is a normal feature here. And the normal, very small ventricles, comma-shaped ventricles on both sides in the coronal view. So this is a 28 kg, appropriate for gestational age, a case of hyaline membrane disease. Surfactant is given, and following that, the child becomes lethargic. And on doing an ultrasound, what I find here is that instead of a small choroid plexus, there is a large echogenic plexus here, and in between there is hypoechoic spaces. The child has bled into the ventricles, and this is a case of intraventricular bleed. The sequelae of that is that when this bleed resolves, it gets controlled, it resolves, and it obstructs the path of the CSF, and you can detect the hydrocephalus as well. A 28-weeker appropriate for gestation received surfactant for HMD has got a smooth course, and at the end of 1 month, when we are doing routine USGs at the end of 1 month, even if the child is normal, and I can see that there are cystic spaces on both sides. This is the periventricular cystic spaces. This is a cystic periventricular leukomalacia. A newborn with off color. This is the case, day 10, a child who has come in shock. You can see the paleness of the child. It is on ventilator, listless. Here what we see is the suprasternal view. We look for the aorta, the aortic arch. This is the ascending aorta, the aortic arch, and the descending aorta. And we see that on the color, we see this is a normal arch, because we see the ascending part and the descending part as well. And here you can see that there is some shelving the juxtaductal area, and you can see the narrowed flow of the blood in the descending aorta. So this was coarctation of aorta. A similar presentation with a pale child on day 3, day 4 could also be a very small ventricle, this is the hypoplastic left heart. So these were the ductus dependent systemic circulation. Now this is a very cyanotic child, is in shock, and you can see that I'm showing you a normal parasternal long axis view here. This is the left ventricle with some tilt to the left, the right actually, so that I can open the right ventricular outflow tract and you are able to see the pulmonary wall. So this is the right RVOT and the pulmonary wall. Now you can see here in this patient that the pulmonary valve is not opening at all, and this was a case of pulmonary atresia. A 28-weeker appropriate gestational age, HMD surfactant has been given and is going to be extubated now, but develops tachycardia in the ICU. And this is because of the opening up of the PDA. As you can see that there is a flow from the descending aorta to the pulmonary artery. So because of this, their child has developed tachycardia, and I delay extubation by 1 or 2 days. Finally, in the case, as you can see here, all 4 chambers of the heart are communicating. This is a AV canal defect. So to summarize, these are the certain few conditions that we see in day-to-day practice that we come across, and how ultrasound can help us, what impact it had. It ruled out certain abnormalities, it diagnosed certain abnormalities, it improved the speed of diagnosis, it modified our clinical diagnosis of admission, it improved the speed of initiation of certain treatment, and it prompted certain invasive procedures like a pericardial tamponade. So to conclude, focus ultrasound has got a wide scope in pediatrics. These are only a few cases. I have not gone into many more cases where we can definitely use ultrasound. Its role begins where clinical examination ends. It gives the pediatrician quick insight into the case. It increases comfort level in the emergency room. And most of all, in today's time, it helps us in counseling and controlling the relatives. Now, how to go about in acquiring this skill? There is no other alternative but to learn this skill. It is an uphill task, but not impossible. Reading a lot about the literature, discussing with the friends and the like-minded people, browsing on the net, and we have to go on performing till we master these techniques. Nonetheless, we are going to have our embarrassing moments, but still we have to balance and carry on the show. Obstacles are numerous. The most important is the financial equation. I leave it to you with which to compare. One is to appreciate, the other is going to appreciate. The learning curve, it is not difficult, as have been studies have been done on this. And finally, the greatest obstacle is PCP Act, because it spares the radiologist, it spares the cardiologist, it spares the obstetricians, and we as pediatricians, though we are, ultrasound is of much use to us in day-to-day practice, unless it comes into our curriculum, the PCP Act will still not spare us, because for the radiologist, for the cardiologist, for the obstetrician, they do not have to have any separate training. It is in their curriculum. So this should be incorporated in the curriculum, maybe at the level of fellowship level or in the final year of MD course. But my final word would be, it should not be a substitute, but be supplement and correlated to a good examination. And finally, thanks to the IIP, Maharashtra IIP, as well as the Central IIP, because this platform is a ray of hope, and this is all what we need in today's time of the COVID. Thank you so much for patient listening.
Thank you, Dr. Vikram. It was a very excellent deliberation. I think Dr. Pandrikar sir might have appreciated his face. I'm seeing his face is quite enlightened. And I hear, sir, I hear appreciate the presence of Dr. Hemant Gangule as well. Dr. Dabadkar sir is there. Sir, आहेत का?
Yes, he is there.
Dabadkar sir. Sir, Dabadkar sir.
I'm there. Hello.
बोला sir, बोला.
Yes, I was keeping mute. No. You go on. Your academic discussion is going on very good. It's very difficult for me to concentrate because of so many responsibilities. Should I talk right now? Formal talk?
Yes, sir. बोला,
It's really pleasure, respected Dr. Nimain Mohanty sir, to whom I love and respect a lot. Our dignitaries Vikram and Dr. Bharat Kore and Mahesh Kore and everybody. Please accept my compliments, Dr. Pandrikar, Dr. Jay Bhandarkar. You are doing excellent work. Pandrikar, we have extended our term of Maharashtra IIP presidency for 1 year because of your excellent work. And Jay, you and Dr. Pandrikar, Dr. Gangulia, you have created history, or you have created waves in India. And considering your enthusiasm, we are also planning all these things in West Zone Pedicon. I would like to say a few words regarding West Zone Pedicon. Dr. Vikram and Dr. Kore sir.
Yeah,
We have everything in our West Zone conference, everything like academics, non-academic, sports, quizzes, and of course Bollywood quiz to be handled by Jay Bhandarkar and Hemant Gangulia, and academic quiz by Dr. Gangulia again and Mahesh Moite sir. So many things are there. It's my sincere request. Wherever are you, whenever possible, please register this conference. Registration is open. It is free. We are also trying for MMC accreditation accreditation points. Most important, every my friend is working hard in Maharashtra. I need your contribution, your love, your support for all these conferences. As you know, when and as I talked in morning with Dr. Nimai Mohanty sir, he will be in charge of our paper and poster, or rather than in charge, he's judge of our paper and poster presentation. So I'm extremely busy in all these things. I'm sorry, all dignitaries, I could not concentrate on that because on one side I was seeing all the mails which I received and I was trying to solve all the problems. But best thing, Pandrikar sir, I wish you best luck. I know time is too less, but join our West Zone Pedicon Paschim Ranga. And congratulations, Jay Bhandarkar, you are doing extremely good work all over.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. I will ask Dr. Hemant Gangulia to speak few words. He was skeptical about this. Why pay addition doing sonography? I think his face speaks. There is a lot of scope for sonography, echo for the gender pay addition as well as for the intensivist. Please, Gangulia ji, few words from you before we are going to the next speaker. Mohesh Kore is from Nipani, senior pay addition, friend of mine. He is going to speak on cranial USG. His inputs. डॉक्टर गंगोलिया त्यानंतर पांढरीकर सर बोलतील आणि मग कोरे सर चालू करतील त्यांचं प्रेझेंटेशन.
In the meantime, Dr. Zai, please ask for extension of time, about 10 minutes. Yes. We have eaten out the time.
Okay.
I think should we ask Dr. Mahesh Kore sir to start? We can talk later on.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
sir. Okay, no problem.
Please.
Okay. Kore sir.
Share करू screen.
हाँ सर चालू करा please. हाँ. 30 minutes are there remaining. DIP message आहे त्यामुळे फास्ट करावं लागेल आपल्याला.
नाही 30 मिनिट होऊन जाईल, काय प्रॉब्लेम नाही. विक्रमनं बरंच काम सोपं केलंय माझं. Okay, so my talk is not cranial ultrasound but clinical ultrasound and correlation. Okay, so I have modified it because I am not an expert in ultrasonography. I am a general practitioner. I thank Dr. Jai, Dr. Mohanty sir, Dr. Pendarkar sir, and all team, DIP team. We are basically clinicians. Pediatricians are basically clinicians. And what is the need of ultrasonography in a hospital, in his own hospital? That is a question. Whether it is cost effective, whether it is really needed, and how costly is the machine, and PCPNDT Act, and so many things. So I will go with the cases first, and then you will see whether it is ultrasonography is needed or not needed. Okay. The 23 days male newborn came to my hospital on 20th of June, this lockdown period at midnight. Okay, and he was pulseless. We started with oxygen, could not get an IV line by my expert staff, and they have called me for intraosseous line. Okay, first time I was unsuccessful, but second time we had been successful putting an intraosseous line, and this was the intraosseous line. And I was thinking why he has gone into shock, pulseless. It is hypovolemic, cardiogenic, sepsis, or obstructive. But without wasting much time, because I didn't have any time to do ultrasonography, or ultrasonography was on the first floor and it was not portable, I decided to push IV push NS 20 ml per each time. So we kept on giving 20 ml, 20 ml. Up to 80 ml, there was no pulse. And after 80 ml, I could feel feeble pulse. And almost we have given 160 ml to this tiny newborn. I didn't know the weight at that time, but to stabilize that child, we have to give 160 ml. And looking at the congestive cardiac failure signs, a liver and bilateral crepes clinically. And now there are some signs of life. The pulse ox went from 70 to 98, and it was 1:30 a.m. in the morning. Okay. Then we interrogated mother and shouted at her why she didn't come earlier. The child was not sucking well for last 3 days, and he was failure to thrive. Birth weight was 3 kg, but yesterday's weight, he went to one pediatrician and weight was there 2.4 kg. Definitely failure to thrive. No suck rest suck cycle. That means we are less likely to have cardiac cause. So hypovolemic was much more than the cardiac and sepsis as the child was afebrile. Okay, then we started because it was a volume responsive, but we have started with again not to drop down again adrenaline, and I have given hydrocortisone 25 milligrams stat. Thought of doing X-ray and echocardiogram, but child was on the ground floor and equipments were on the first floor. Okay, we decided against taking the risk of destabilizing the only lifeline that is intraosseous. Then coming to the hypovolemic shock, there was no loose stools, no vomiting, no GI loss, no hemorrhage. There must be some hidden loss. Abdomen was soft. AF was normal. Then where is the loss? I thought that it must be renal tubular. Okay, but baby deteriorated at 5 a.m. Breathlessness increased, liver started coming up, SpO2 dropped. Now we are shifted to NICU. I said, oh my God, what we have done? Should we have done echo earlier on arrival? Yeah, this was the child shifted to NICU now with high flow, and X-ray was done. X-ray seems to be okay to me. The heart is normal, lungs are clear. Then why he developed that breathlessness and liver? Then we did this. You can appreciate here already. Vikram has told you this is dilated heart, and I thought that this I have missed. The guilty thought lingered in my mind. Started with IV furosemide, dobutamine drip, and adrenaline was reduced. Thought of intubating that child because that so bad he was, but waited by the side of the patient. Baby looked better after 30 minutes. So continued same line of treatment, that is dobutamine and IV furosemide, and baby settled down. And I'm not an expert in echo, so I have to take help of somebody else to do the echo. Echo machine is there, means ultrasonography machine is with me, but I am not an echocardiologist as Dr. Vikram. I was confused. So I taken help of Dr. Bhaskar Yadav, and he helped me in this. But with the history, it was the second product of second degree consanguinity. Mother was hypothyroid on L-droxine. Dehydrated baby, eyes sunken, was not fitting into cardiogenic shock initially. And he tolerated that 160 ml for 3 kg means so much, 60 ml per kg we have given already. The reports of now we could cannulate him, take a blood for investigation, and the reports are like this: a polymorphonuclear leukocytosis, urine proteins 4+, and few cells with RBCs. And he definitely had metabolic acidosis with probably hyponatremia 135, borderline, and hyperkalemia. But I thought at that time maybe it was pre-renal because blood urea was high and serum creatine 1.2. Ammonia was sent to rule out IM causes because of sudden deterioration. Okay, so Bhaskar said that it is dilated cardiomyopathy, and in each case of dilated cardiomyopathy, EF was, ejection fraction was only 25, and in any case of dilated cardiomyopathy, you have to rule out coarctation of aorta, critical aortic stenosis, Al-Kappa, hypocalcemia with vitamin D deficiency, and thiamine deficiency, because these are the treatable causes of dilated cardiomyopathy in early infancy. Unless you look for that, if you miss some of them, like Al-Kappa, which is very much treatable, hypocalcemia, we have seen hypocalcemic child having dilated cardiomyopathy, and going correction by giving only calcium and vitamin D. Thiamine responsive is built in near Bangalore, where they present with dilated cardiomyopathy or pulmonary artery hypertension, and a term is labeled that thiamine responsive pulmonary artery hypertension. You supply thiamine and pulmonary hypertension disappears within minutes. That's why you should know this condition, which are treatable one. As the baby tolerated 160 ml initially, improved, it's a hypovolemic shock, no GI loss, no third press loss, has to be renal tubular. Prolonged hypovolemia, hypoxemia, ischemia leads to myocardial dysfunction with AKI. That was my interpretation. And renal tubular disorder, which are the renal tubular disorder which will present with shock? RTA, yes, but they will not present such a shock, pulseless. Barter's metabolic alkalosis. So it has to be distal tubular disorder, having aldosterone problem and cortisol deficiency. It is a case probably of CAH. And presenting on a second week to the fourth week with shock, we should think of CAH, because they will, this 21 hydroxylase deficiency will present with shock, metabolic acidosis, hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hypoglycemia. Hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hypoglycemia are the effects of cortisol and aldosterone deficiency. So that's why we have given hydrocortisone 25 milligram, that is to the tune of 100 milligram per meter square. And this will take care of cortisol and mineralocorticoid activity as well. So this was life-saving in this baby, and aldosterone deficiency, cortisol deficiency can be diagnosed with increased 17-hydroxyprogesterone. These are blocked with 21-hydroxylase deficiency, 17-OHP is increased, and there is testosterone is much more. So cortisol level were normal because we have given already hydrocortisone. Testosterone was high, 17-OH was high, and baby presently on Hyson 5 milligram half TDS, Pluricort 100 milligram BD, because these distal tubules aldosterone receptors are not that active, not that sensitive. That's why you have to give higher doses of fluorocortisone for this child, and salt in divided doses. Yes, does this baby require genetic workup? Yes, definitely. This baby will require genetic workup for 21 hydroxylase CAH. So CAH 17 OHP, if more than 1200 nanogram per deciliter, it is definitely CAH. And in this, our child, we have this 17.6 only, but denominator is different. This is per ml. If you convert this to per deciliter, multiplied by 100, it 1760, definitely about 1200 nanogram. So it was a case of CAH itself. So after this, we have done, after 4 days of therapy, this contractility has eyeballing. Vikram has called this is eyeballing. By looking at the echo also, you will come to know that this is a normal contractility of the child. Normal excretion of the tricuspid wall, mitral wall, aortic wall also is shown there. So hyperkalemic acidosis, clinical hypovolemic shock, echocardiography with dilated cardiomyopathy, clinical correlation, hypoxic dilated cardiomyopathy, reverted, and final diagnosis, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, 21 hydroxylase deficiency. Now coming to neurosonography. Neurosonography is useful in neonates, specifically in prematures less than 32 weeks, and in some clinical cases like meningitis, hydrocephalus for follow-up. So coming to my second case, a 4-day girl as full-term LSCS cried immediately after birth. She came to me on the 4th day of life, drowsy, tachypneic, hypoglycemic, metabolic acidosis. There was no risk factor for sepsis, but mother was normal. There was no loose stools, no ETI, no fever in mother. Baby was also febrile. So initially we thought of IEM in this child. A hypoglycemia with metabolic acidosis with urine ketones nil, probably fatty acid oxidation defect. But after stabilization, we have done a CSF and it turned out to be pyogenic meningitis. E. coli in blood culture grown on a second time. And he developed all sorts of complications. When developed ventriculitis, progressive hydrocephalus. He was with us for 1.5 months in lockdown period. We have done repeated neurosonography, repeated CSF examination. 8,000 count, cells of 8,000 has come down to 2,000, then to 1,000. We have to do MRI also. We have to take help of Dr. Vilas Jadhav, who is a neurophysician in Kolhapur. But he was clinically better after 15 days. But cells wise, lab wise, he was not better. And there was progressive hydrocephalus with ventriculitis. So for that purpose, we have to do repeated taps. We have given an option of repeated taps and external ventricular drainage. They opted for tap because of the financial constraint. But it can be done at Nippani, and you can see this is a large lateral ventricle, dilated lateral ventricle, and you can see this is a track of previous tap. This is also one more tap. We have done twice, and this was the third time we have done. So you can see this is a dilated ventricle. We have to enter with all aseptic precautions and cleaning up the probe. Now you can see the needle here going down. So this we have drained almost 50 to 60 ml of fluid from this ventricular tap. We have done this thrice in Nippani itself. Okay, this is the advantage of ultrasonography. You can do these procedures fearlessly and with confidence. You see here, we have done it, removed this much. Almost we have removed 60 ml at the end, and BB was slightly better. But ultimately, we have to counsel them for surgery. Surgery in 2 stages, because CSF proteins were at around 500 milligram. So we cannot put a VP shunt because it will be blocked by that high protein content. So external ventricular drainage has to be done in this child. After much counseling, parents took baby for external ventricular drainage. And right now, this is yesterday's photograph. They have done at Pune external ventricular drain. And baby is absolutely fine now. Baby was fine after 15 days, clinically fine, sucking well, afebrile, gaining weight. All these things made us to push these parents for further therapy. So you have to counsel them and explain them the risk also. So we have explained them the risk and benefits of all the things, and they have opted for the operation lastly. Next time they have to do VP shunt also, if the pressure remains high in that ventricular system. But BB is fine now, right now. Next case, 6 weeks boy, vomiting persistent for 2 weeks. It was a case of IHPS, hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. Hypertrophic pyloric stenosis can be managed surgically very well, pyloromyotomy. And there are papers with oral atropine from North. And Utpal Kant has treated more than 500 patients on oral atropine. What is hypertrophic pyloric stenosis? The stomach is there, pylorus is there, and intestine there. Pylorus is thickened. This is the elongated pylorus, and this is a thickened muscle. And we have to take help of sonologists to prove that it is pyloric stenosis. But for follow-up, we have started this oral atropine treatment in our clinic. Initially, we used to give them IV fluids with injectable atropine, and 4 hourly, that is 4 hourly, means 6 times a day. And within 2 or 3 days, you have to shift them. This is a child who has lost to follow-up and came to me after 1.5 years for some other illness, and we have taken a photograph. It's absolutely normal. This is a after 2 minutes after feed. You can beautifully see the milk passing through the pylorus and pylorus melting down on ultrasonography. So first, initially, if you do ABG, on ABG, you'll get hypochloremic alkalosis as against hyperkalemic acidosis in CAH. It is hypochloremic alkalosis. If base excess is more than +3, you are very much sure that you are dealing with this condition. And this condition has to be treated with 0.9%, means full DNS, plus potassium, because they are potassium is low, hypokalemic. You have to give atropine injectable initially, and 2 to 3 days, then you can shift this 3 hourly. 10 to 15 minutes before feed, you have to give atropine. And now we have got 7 cases. A first case was failed because we were not sure that it will work, and he required operation. But after that, we have read lot, and we have started with giving atropine, oral atropine, injectable atropine, as well as oral atropine for 3 to 4 weeks, and all babies settle with that atropine. 6 cases up till now with me. We have to increase the dose gradually of atropine, and there are absolutely no side effects of atropine. You have to monitor HGPT once a week. Use of ultrasound for daily follow-up, assurance of improvement, visual for the parents is much more important, and is a safe and cheap method to do. One more case, 4-month boy, sweating over the forehead, 3 months, difficulty in swallowing, 2 months, breathlessness for 15 days, and bilateral inguinal hernia since birth. It was an active child and had, this is a child, is so much active, but there are intercostal retractions are there, and he's tachypnic, but in no distress. So it has to be a cardiac one. There is a dilated heart, cardiomegaly is there, and now you should diagnose it as there is a dilated IVC. And this is a dilated interventricular septum, much more thickened. And Vikram has already shown this case to you. He has already listed this condition. All chambers are dilated, right ventricle, left ventricle. You can see the coronaries also here. So
I'll call you back. I'm in a meeting, Acharu.
Yeah.
I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back.
Okay. So R waves and S waves, tall R waves and deep S wave in all the leads. So echo wise, ECG wise, X-ray wise, all suggestive of a storage disorder, that is glycogen storage disorder. Type 2, that is Pompe's disease. But we have not stopped at this point up. We have taken a blood and we have sent it to Sri Gangaram Hospital. And this total acid alpha glucosidase test can be done for free. It is free from Sanofi. Okay, Sanofi people will guide you, help you in this. And if you diagnose this, we have diagnosed this as a Pompe disease. Myozyme enzyme is there for replacement, and in Karnataka, it is available free of cost at Indira Gandhi Institute, Child Health. So, but we have referred this child to that Bangalore center, but because of some social reasons and because of other reasons, they could not get that myozyme, and baby expired within 1 month. Okay. Last but one case, 1 year, 10-month child had a fever for 6 to 7 days. Toxic, interfebrile active, had loose stools, watery, no blood mucus, irritable child butt. And he has a scoliosis, bilateral conjunctivitis, but no cervical lymphadenopathy. Skin has macular rash all over body. That was not vesicular. Anemia was milder only. So we thought of Kawasaki disease, but fever for 5 days was there. And from the crash, conjunctivitis was there, rash was there, but no adenopathy. Strawberry tongue was there, but hand swelling was not there or pilling. I mean, there was no edema. So we are fulfilling only 3 criteria. In this case, what you have to do is you have to take a help of laboratory. You have to do all this CRP, ESR, CBC, albumin, ALT, urine analysis with micro, all this. And if 3 or more are there, then you are more likely to have Kawasaki. But in our case, we have got only CRP and ESR high, no third. So we have to do echo for that to prove that it is, and targeted echo of coronaries only directly. So I am showing you the coronaries view only. This is a short axis view. This is a aortic wall, and you can see dilated left coronary artery. You have to look here. From here, the left coronary artery originates. Now you can. So I'm not an echocardiologist. I have taken a help of Dr. Bhaskar again from Satara, and he has said definite dilatation. And I was not convinced. Then he has freeze this and asked me to measure this length. It was 0.28 centimeters, and it turned out to be within this more than Z score is more than 2.5. That is 2.67. So it was definitely dilated. And this Z score calculator is available online. You don't have to purchase it. You just have to fill height, weight, and age of the child. So that was Kawasaki. We have treated that with IVIG and aspirin, and that baby has settled now. So bedside echo has done to help me to diagnose Kawasaki with confidence. Okay. Last case, Jui, she admitted on the 5th of September to me, 8-year child, had a history of fall from chair on a cot. She was standing on a chair, and with mobile she went to cot and she fall down. With severe pain in abdomen, she came to me. She was drowsy, hypotensive, so I have to give IV bolus. And ultrasonographically, we have confirmed that it is hypovolemia. So now there was tenderness in a right hypochondriac. Now we have to do focus examination. We have to see for liver and kidney, which are anatomical structures at the right hypochondriac region. So this was a picture, ultrasonographical picture. This is a liver. This was a huge kidney with all these black areas in between. And I was not understanding what is it. So I have to video call Dr. Vinayak Mane, ultrasonologist, my routine ultrasonologist, a phono friend, and he said that the kidney is shattered actually. It is multiple pieces are there. He isn't. So there was grade 4 to 5, almost 5 grade trauma to the kidney. So I thought that I should shift this child to a nephrology unit or surgical unit. And this was a swipe, ultrasonography swipe of kidney. You can see multiple areas of blackening. These are all hemorrhages. So we have done a CT scan also. And what is the treatment of kidney, shattered kidney or traumatic kidney? No, NOM. O. Stay calm and quiet, stabilize the child, and first grade to 4th grade, you don't have to do anything. You have to manage medically. It is a conservative treatment, non-operative treatment, OM, NOM. Okay, so we have managed this child. IV push was given, PCV, HB was 5.5, 1 bag PC was given, ultrasonographically next day, what we have found, this is a kidney, this is a liver, this is a diaphragm, and these are the areas where pleural space. There is a fluid in the pleura. So what? And starry appearance. Starry appearance will say that there is a hemorrhage. Blood is there. All these pictures, you can see this. You can see the lung coming in between in the next video. There is a space here, pleural space. This is lung coming in between. So we have to drain this and there was 300 ml of fluid was drained. Hemothorax was drained, and this was a child yesterday, 10th of July, admitted on the 5th of July night, and this was a day 6, stabilized, urine is clear, hemothorax is not draining much now, much more. Joey on a 10th September, and with that mobile which has caused her fall. So COVIDology, COVID-19 lockdown, plenty of time, less patients. So I have learned a lot of things. And one of them is ultrasonography. And you don't have to be expert in ultrasonography. If you don't know anything, if you know which are the probes, and lower frequency probes are meant for deeper structure, higher frequency probes are meant for upper structure, and there is echo probe, sector probe, linear probe. If you know these 3 probes, that's all you have to know, and you can buy an ultrasonography machine and take a help of others to find out what is the cause. Because in Pompe disease, within half an hour we were on diagnosis that it is Pompe circuit. In that right kidney injury, within 45 minutes we were on the diagnosis that her right kidney is shattered, and we have to treat it conservatively. Her liver is normal, pancreas is normal, left kidney is normal, bladder is normal. We have done all by ultrasound and taking a help of video call. I'm not expert in abdominal ultrasonography. I can see only IVC now and dilated heart. That's all my limits. But that is how we can, without shifting the patient, we can diagnose all this condition. And so last 4 years, we are using ultrasonography. First year, I have done only 4 ultrasonography. First year of my purchase, 16 lakhs of purchase and 4 ultrasonography with no A. But later on, it is now we are using it daily in neonatology. Neonatal ultrasonography, cranial ultrasonography for hemorrhage or dilatation or birth asphyxia and PDA detection. And we have given once 120 ml per kg to the neonate, septic neonate. And that was possible, just possible because of this ultrasonography. Thank you. Thank you very much for your question listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vikram and Dr. Mahesh also. Excellent presentations, which are eye-opening. I don't know why our pediatricians are not so enthusiastic to join. Only 15 people are here now. Had it been a vaccine session, maybe there are many.
Monty sir,
yeah.
Monty sir, these 15 people, they are on the panelist
On the
list,
panelist.
but rest they are they are listening.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great.
So almost number must be more than 500, 700.
Oh, I'm excited. That's great. This ultrasonography, it should be actually inbuilt from the very beginning of our training. So I'll tell you, my background is very old. I'm an old guy. Like at this age, you are starting ultrasound and practicing it so confidently. This message should go to our youngsters. A lot of scope is there in the bedside ultrasonography. In our time, the ultrasound was just coming in PGI Chandigarh. I was in 84. So the machines were only 1 or 2 machines in the radiology department. And for each case, there is a case in the world, we used to go ourselves with the patient to the ultrasonography so that you learn and do it hands-on. There is no shortcut. So if you do not know cycling, nobody taught us cycling. Initial days, there are some hesitations are there, but you have to write. So ultrasonography, without any hesitation, you have to hold the probe. And as sir has said, which probe you have to select, that will learn on the training line. You can learn easily. It's very easy. I can recollect these cases when blindly we have done when things were not there. Yeah. Rupture of the kidney we have done when the practicing in a rural area in 71, but we have done conservatively, little hematuria with history, we could diagnose, rest and recovered. But later on, we after say 10, 15 years, when the child marriage came, and they want to do a X-ray and let's say IVP, that the one kidney is gone, non-functional kidney, but no problem. One kidney is functioning.
Yeah.
So this is the message should go in the rural areas. This is the like a stethoscope. Things are coming now. This ultrasound may come up as a miniature devices. It will be very useful. Few days back, a lot of PNDT issues were there in Panvel. We got notices how your ultrasound is being handled by pediatrics and neonatology. When I came to MGM in 2006, I purchased the ultrasound machine very nice. Nothing do, we'll do ourselves. They were insisting, no, we'll do. I said, no. Cranial ultrasound, you are not trained. We are more trained. Let us do it together. We'll learn from each other. So hands-on we have to do. Only few issues, sir. Dr. Vikram, this interception case you have handled. It's very interesting picture. If you could later on, if not today, you can show how interception looks on ultrasound. It's an instant diagnosis. It's very interesting to diagnose. Now we can reduce the interception also. And this we would like to see how mediastinal leaks look like. Like we have seen the pneumothorax, like we have seen the pericardial, the pneumopericardium. If you can show us the mediastinal leaks. Ventriculitis, thank God you have treated that child and doing repeated ventricular tap. Before this ultrasound, what we were doing, we will go this pragmatic and go about 2 inches lateral and pierce a needle. The direction needle should be to your nose, inner campus of eye. You will get this. So we will blindly be able to do it. Yeah. But now things are there. So if anybody should venture, try doing it. It should be very ethically in a methodic way. And it's it's a very good thing that the child could be salvaged. Maybe those days cefotaxime, ceftriaxone was not there. Ampichloro or ampigenta, so many combinations we are using. Ventricular tap and installation of cefotaxime from some smuggled sources into the ventricles. Those are days how to we are treating ventriculitis, and still the next day a lot of pus will come. So that's a very frustrating affair. Now with this drainage systems available, things are better. And this congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis, this thickness of the pyloric end, it should be not at least more than 4 millimeter, and the length, that extended, the length has to be at least more than 14 millimeter. That is a guideline you have to follow. And atropine, we have given a thesis to one of our students in MGM. We have done 30 cases, and really it's very much encouraging. It's a nice thing you have treated away 10 cases in a peripheral setting. It's very heads up to you. Any questions coming from the audience? We'll take that first. Anything coming from audience, please?
Dr. Ganguly want to speak something?
Yeah, please.
2 minutes.
Ganguly
sir.
Before that, if anybody questions that, you just go ahead. Otherwise, really, this respected faculty is a wonderful eye-opener session to us. And it's all because of the results of the enthusiasm of our Dr. Jay Bhandarkar. Really, I appreciate what Dr. Vikram said. This we are using as a supplemental or the corroborative also for the use of that. And when Jay asked me, I am keeping this too as a faculty, तो मी जयला म्हणालो, जय माझा एक ओळखीचा चांगला रेडिओलॉजिस्ट आहे, त्याला घेऊ का पॅनल वरती? तो म्हणाला अरे गडबड होणार. मला गडबड नाही होणार. But the point was that because of PCPNDT Act, I thought of including, but then when I asked the radiologist, he was very skeptical. But दोन जेव्हा असतील तेव्हा मी येणार नाही ते बोलायला. म्हणजे ठीक आहे, okay. But then that was we didn't have that radiologist. Now, I think so. There are two issues, main important two issues. The first issue is the PCPNDT Act. Surely, the registration of the machine at the hospital should be under the name of any qualified person. That is not. That I don't know whether Dr. Vikram and Dr. Mahesh Kore sir may be doing. Probably they just get registered under some name of the whatever the options you have said as the obstetricians or gynecologists, whatever that. But then surely, if you are taking the machine, we have to follow the norms of the PCPNDT Act, and we have to follow everything. That is one for sure. We as a pediatrician, we should not be afraid of that. Whatever the Dr. Vikram and Dr. Mahesh Kore sir spoke about, definitely we can use this modality. It's a very wonderful modality, should be used. But then what is the solution? I will tell you. Their laws are, believe me, laws are very good. but we are only afraid of that. We have that fear in our back of the mind, and so we are worried about that. I will tell you one thing only for that, because we are using this radiology as a modality for the timely intervention to give the treatment in an emergency situation, where definitely in a 2 or 3 cases, if would have not done, it would have landed in a severe problem. So what does you say from this section 52 of IPC? Which says, if you are doing any act which is in good faith, definitely you are there, no fear, no problem will occur. But at the same time, to document the things that it was required to do that and to do all these things, so we have to document properly. But as a case, my findings say this suggests because we should do. At the same time, most of the time, Dr. Mahesh Kore sir was stressing, I'm not an expert pediatric cardiologist, not echocardiologist, but sir, what you can do the sonography, you can transmit a live images to the specialist echocardiologist and get his opinion on that, and have that documented on a paper. It is not a negligence. You will not be held responsible. 100%.
I have done that only.
Yes, it is 100.
In lockdown season, I have done that only, and we have done almost 20 echocardiology within these 3 months.
So this fear, what is in the minds of pediatricians, we should remove totally.
Yeah.
Remember
Definitely.
me. Remember this thing. Whatever you are doing, if you are doing good faith, it's a wonderful. And lastly, as Dr. Vikram said, surely it is not included in our pediatric curriculum. We should go for it. IAP as an association should try for it and should convince the people, as well as should write the letters. I feel Dr. Vikram and Dr. Mahesh are at a better position to draft the letter, to write the things, to corroborate the evidences, to tell the facts, where we can use this sonography as a pediatrician to the government of Maharashtra, as well as the Maharashtra Medical Council, so we can go further, pursue the matter perfectly. By that time, only documentation and properly said is the escape, is the solution for us, that I want to say. With that, I thank you very much, Jay. A wonderful eye-opener session. I feel this should be like the session, like BPD Bagar regular, and these are really practical things which we have helpful for the peripheral general pediatricians, I feel so.
Yes. So
Thank you, Dr. Hemant sir.
Dr. Vikram want to say something. Yes, Dr. Vikram sir.
Thanks for your comments. And first is that this mediastinal thing is, mediastinum is deeper, no? So ultrasound waves do not reach there. So that is a drawback. So second is very important issue Dr. Hemant Gangulia sir made out, this PCPNDT Act. So when I got the registration, the PCPNDT Act said that any person who has got training in ultrasound for a period of 6 months can do the ultrasound. So I got that.
Yes,
in
exactly.
fact, I got training for much more than 6 months. Okay.
Yes.
But at that time, in 2012, it did not specify where they should get the training. So at that time, you could get a training with a neighborhood radiologist also. So that is why I did. I went to a hospital where my friends were there. I stayed. I used to go to them. I used to go to a cardiologist. I went for 10 months to a cardiologist. But now in 2014, there are amendments in the Act which say they have specified the centers where you can get the training.
Yes.
Now these training centers are mostly the medical colleges or big hospitals. So now if you have to have training, you have to go there and get the training. That is number one. Unless you have this qualification, even it is an offense on the part of the vendor to come and show the machine also.
Yes.
So unless you get PCPNDT registration, even you cannot be shown machine in your hospital. So that is very important thing. So I was lucky that when I got that, there was no such thing. And that is why I tried it, because I could take out the loophole in that Act.
Yes.
It is such an important Act, but there was a big loophole, was that there is no specification of the center. So I immediately did it. I did it in 2013 and 2014, the amendment. Then I consulted one of the lawyers, a medical lawyer in our city, Dr. Girish Kumthekar, and I told him, now this law has come, but I got in that period. So that if you got in that period, that your qualification holds good. So that is why I said that is why we are reporting. And secondly, as you said that really we should not fear, but this fear should be removed from the mind, because everywhere you are the first person in the panel that who is for this. But wherever I have given lectures, all of them, they have told me that it is a little bit dangerous to give reports.
No.
You are the first one that I am hearing, sir.
The thing what I wanted to tell you, if the law, if there's made the amendments, it will not go retrospective. So you will not be covered in that. So whatever the training you have, that is okay. Now the question is of the having the training is as good as whatever the training they're giving for the other pathis to prescribe allopathic medicine, the bridge course, what is going on. So this is as good as bridge course for the doing the this training session as a tool for the pediatrician to do the radiology. I'm sure you may be having lots of problem whenever you are
internet.
Internet connectivity.
Okay. So okay, I'll just sum up because already we are running short of time. So I must thank Dr. Vikram sir and Dr. Mahesh Goyal sir for enlightening us on very excellent topic. When Dr. Jay Bhandarkar told me that we should take this such a webinar, then I said sonography for pediatricians, is it really going to help us? He said, sir, definitely is going to help us. And now at the end of this webinar, I would say that I must recommend as the president of Maharashtra IIP, the central IIP, that
Yes,
the
sir,
central IIP should come up with the module for the residents and module for the pediatricians regarding the use of webinar in pediatric practice. This is my suggestion and to the central IIP. Excellent presentations, excellent deliberations, nicely discussion on the dilated cardiomyopathy, whether it's pleural effusion or Pompe's disease or the cardiac component. Really, thank you very much, Dr. Vikram sir and Dr. Mahesh sir, for covering this, enlightening us on this very excellent topic, which probably we as a pediatrician would have definitely missed. And that too, especially in smaller places. It's okay if you are working in a big setups, their sonography machine is readily available just across the next floor or at the same floor. But in small places like Amravati or small places like even Solapur, I would say, Kolhapur, I would say, like Dr. Mahesh Goyal is practicing at the small place like Nipani. And that too, he is practicing there and doing fantastic work. Hats off to you, sir, for your great work in this field. Once again, it's an eye-opener session for all of us. And thank you very much. Thank you, Niman Mohanty, sir.